It is Sunday, the 15th of September, 2019. I'm in front of the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist congregation in Lachine, Quebec, and I am protesting against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of clergy abuse, and the abusive misuse of the Canadian criminal justice system by Unitarian Universalists in their effort to cover up and deny clergy abuse and essentially suppress my ability to engage in peaceful public protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal. They've actually successfully imposed court conditions on me which prevent me from being at the Unitarian Church of Montreal for some time. I'm appealing that, and I'm trying to get the conditions reduced to allow me to return and protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, but for the time being I can't. So I will be protesting here in front of the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist congregation fairly regularly. I don't expect to be here every Sunday, but I do think I will try to be here a couple of Sundays per month indefinitely until such a time as I'm able to protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal again, which may take months and possibly even some years. Here we are, and one of the issues I'm protesting against is the fact that the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston hired Stikeman Elliott barristers and solicitors defamation lawyer Maitre Marc-André Coulombe to falsely accuse me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel in June of 2012 for allegedly, and I do say allegedly, making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. That's an exact quote from the cease and desist demand letter that I was served with in June of 2012. So that's going back a little while, basically going back more than 7 years now. And so what it came down to is that the Unitarian Universalist Association threatened to have me charged with the criminal act of blasphemous libel because I had blogged about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, Richard Buell of First Parish Norwell, who by the way is not a Unitarian Universalist minister, and some other Unitarian Universalists. So that was an egregious, abusive misuse of Canada's blasphemy law, although they never actually went forward on that threat. Just the threat alone is outrageous, and in fact it totally disregards and violates, and in fact ended a centuries-old tradition on the part of Unitarians and Universalists of opposing blasphemy laws. Unitarian Universalists, and before that Unitarians and Universalists, because they didn't merge until the early 1960s, the Unitarian religious community and the Universalist religious community were two distinct, separate, more or less heretical Christian religious communities that had different theologies. Although they did have plenty of similarities, they were two different, distinct churches which decided to merge in the early 1960s, I believe 1961, when they basically realized that they were dwindling in numbers, and so they felt that by merging, they would boost their numbers and boost their influence and so on. And there's various other reasons for the merger, including financial ones. They basically merged, but each individual religion, Unitarianism and Universalism, going back some centuries, at least to the 1700s, 1600s perhaps, but certainly in the 1700s and 1800s, Unitarians and Universalists were strongly opposed to blasphemy laws because they were being persecuted and prosecuted with blasphemy laws. So they developed basically this official opposition to blasphemy laws and this tradition of opposing blasphemy laws And then, in the spring of 2012, the Reverend Dr. Peter Morales administration of the Unitarian Universalist Association thought it'd be a really good idea to threaten to have me prosecuted for allegedly violating Canada's blasphemy law in an effort to intimidate me into removing blog posts that told the readily verifiable truth about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, Richard Buell of First Parish Norwell, and other Unitarian Universalists, including other Unitarian Universalist ministers and Sunday school teachers. I rubbed that in their face, if you don't mind my saying so. In fact, at one point, and I saved this for down the road a bit, I asked the lawyer for the Unitarian Universalist Association, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe of Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors, and basically asked him and top-level UUA leadership, such as Reverend Dr. Peter Morales and Kathleen K. Montgomery, the Executive Vice President of the UUA, in an email down the road a bit, some months, even a year or two later, still addressing this issue. I asked them, do Unitarian Universalists hold such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape to be sacred and holy to Unitarian Universalism? Because blasphemy is attacking and criticizing those things which religions hold to be sacred and holy. The only way I could possibly be guilty of blasphemous libel for criticizing and exposing and denouncing such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers and Sunday school teachers, etc., is if the Unitarian Universalist Church held those despicable crimes to be sacred and holy to them. So it's just totally ludicrous misuse of the blasphemy law of Canada, which, by the way, is being repealed. I didn't even know it existed prior to being falsely accused of violating it by Maitre Marc-André Coulombe on behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So it was news to me. And when I first read that cease and desist demand letter on the 1st of June of 2012, it arrived initially as an attachment to an email that was sent to me. It was a PDF attachment of a 2-page document, which I was later served by a bailiff. When I saw that term blasphemous or libel, I said, what on earth is that? I mean, I knew what blasphemous meant, I knew what libel meant, but I'd never seen the two words together in a phrase, blasphemous libel. So I looked up blasphemous libel and discovered that that was basically the technical legal term used in the Canadian Criminal Code for blaspheming against a religion. Basically the Unitarian Universalist Association, as led by Reverend Dr. Peter Morales and basically aided and abetted by Kathleen K. Montgomery, the Executive Vice President of the UUA, they ended that centuries-old tradition of opposing blasphemy laws in June of 2012 by falsely accusing me of violating Canada's blasphemy law in an effort to intimidate me into removing very truthful blog posts about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, Richard Buell of First Parish Norwell, and there were some things I hadn't even blogged about. A cease and desist demand letter not only tries to get you to get rid of what you've already said, but to not say anything else. That's what cease and desist means. It means stop doing this, don't do it anymore. But it's usually a demand letter will be sent out after you've already said a thing or two, and it will often demand that you retract or get rid of, delete, what you've said, make it not visible to the public. Of course, I did none of those things because it was a totally false accusation and an utterly shameful abuse of Canada's blasphemy law. But nonetheless, as far as I'm concerned, that ended the tradition of opposing blasphemy laws. When you try to use a blasphemy law against someone, you are no longer opposed to blasphemy laws. And that is truly a shameful moment in the history of the Unitarian Universalist religious community. I'm just going to check and see if this camera's still running. I had a problem earlier with a battery ran out. Unfortunately, it was supposedly full, but at some point it ran out. So we're okay here. Lots of battery left. 10 minutes into the monologue, as we said. So there's a few people showing up here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars. A couple of people have gone into the church. I may move the camera to make space for a car. If another car wants to park. There's still some room for parking, but right now my tripod is partially in the street. Let's see here. Oh yeah, here we go. Let's see the other side of the sign. Quebec Crown Prosecutors undermine charter rights and freedoms. This picket sign was displayed outside the Palais de Justice of Montreal in, I believe, 2011. This is going back a few years. Going back to, wait a minute. Yeah, I think it was, I'm not 100% sure of the year. And I'd have to double check. But it may well have been 2011, but I think it could have been later. Could have even been after I'd been falsely accused of blasphemous libel. But possibly before. But essentially what happened is Quebec Crown Prosecutors went on strike. And they were picketing the Palais de Justice in Montreal. So there were literally dozens, if not some hundreds, of Quebec Crown prosecutors outside the Palais de Justice of Montreal with picket signs because they were on strike. They wanted better working conditions, better wages, and so on. I think they wanted wage parity with Crown prosecutors in Ontario because apparently they're paid somewhat less in Quebec. So they were on strike, and I had previously had false criminal charges brought against me. In December of 2000, the Unitarian Church of Montreal somehow persuaded the SPVM, that's the Montreal Police Force, Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, to arrest me for alleged public nuisance, for allegedly violating Section 176.3 of the Canadian Criminal Code, which prohibits disrupting the order and solemnity of religious services. So here I was outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal, protesting very peacefully, not making a lot of noise, not disturbing the service at all, when I was arrested for disrupting church services. That was the pretext. So I basically had a criminal trial. I represented myself. I was acquitted, rightfully so, when the Crown prosecutor couldn't prove a single one of the points of law that he had to prove beyond reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction. He had to prove 4 or 5 points of law beyond reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction for, violating Section 176.3 of the Criminal Code. He couldn't prove a single one. I totally demolished the testimony of the prosecution witnesses, Val Bourdon and Jeremy Searle. In fact, I won in about 90 seconds. I mean, it took quite a long time. It was spread over 3 years, but I essentially demolished the church's false accusation in about 90 seconds. I might as well run through it. So I was cross-examining, I believe, Val Bourdon. I had previously already cross-examined Jeremy Searle, if I'm not mistaken. I punched a bunch of holes in his testimony, and it made a few points. But basically, I asked Val Bourdon, can you hear me when you're inside the church during the service? And he responded no, which is the correct answer, because I'm not making a lot of noise. It's a relatively soundproof building. And so, even if I was making noise, they probably wouldn't hear it much. They might get a muffled sound from the outside, but they wouldn't really hear what I'm saying. It wouldn't really be disrupting the service. So he honestly answered no. Correct answer. So my next question was, can you see me when you're inside the church during the church services? And he answered yes. Well, this was the wrong answer, because the sanctuary of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, the wall facing the sidewalk east, is basically a solid brick wall with 4 narrow slit windows in it. 2 of the windows are up very high, and therefore if you're looking out them, all you're going to see is sky. And One of them, the one that's furthest to what we call east or north, depending how you want to look at it, it's totally blocked by a memorial to the firefighters who were killed when the church's transsexual organist burned down the original Unitarian Church back in 1987, if I'm not mistaken. So there's only one narrow slit window, quite high above street level, that you could possibly see me through if you turned in your seat and you looked right, because the seats are such that they actually are perpendicular to that window. So the only way anyone attending a church service at the Unitarian Church of Montreal, participating in a church service, could see me is if they turned their head right and looked through that window. So I asked Valborda, how can you see me, during the service? And he responded, people are staring at you through the lobby windows. Well, he's right. There is a lobby, an entrance lobby, and it does have a large plate glass window that looks out onto the sidewalk in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And yes, at times some people do actually look through that window and see my protest. The only problem is they don't celebrate church services in the lobby. So my next question was, do you celebrate church services in the lobby? And Valborda answered with this long, drawn-out no, because he realized that this was not going very well. So I basically established that I cannot be heard, cannot be seen during church services. Already introduced plenty of reasonable doubt. So my next question was, has a church service ever actually been disrupted by my protest outside the church? Because that's what it's all about. It's about disrupting the church service or not. To which he answered yes.